very good evening to each one of you. On behalf of Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, we welcome you all for this exclusive session on ESG contributing towards risk-free sustainable business. The session is organized under the aegis of ESG Expert Committee. The committee is led by Mr. B.R. Vishwas, Managing Director, Vishwas Construction Industries, and co-chaired by Mr. Rajesh Kumar Jha, Country Environment and Sustainability Manager, ABB India. On behalf of the Chamber, we are beholden to the speakers of this session, Mr. Rahul Preetiani, Senior Director, Energy, Commodities and Sustainability, CRISIL Limited. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation to be with us. We also express our sincere thanks to Mr. Naveen GV, who is the Global Development Officer and Managing Director, Benchmark ESG, and Ms. Shruti Kaveri Iyer, Founding Partner, Kaha Capital. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be part of this exclusive session. The Chamber acknowledges the support of our annual sponsors, many organizations, Bueller, Fundmax, IMPL, MTR, SDMIMD, Sona Group of Companies, Vishwas Group of Companies, and Wipro. Thank you very much to all the participants once again for joining at this session. And I now hand over the stage to Mr. B.R. Vishwas to take it over from here. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rupa. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of BCIC, I welcome you all for today's webinar on environmental, social, and governance contributing towards risk-free sustainable business. In today's session, we would be understanding deeper about the concept of ESG framework, which is helping any business to understand how an organization is managing risks and opportunities related to environmental, social, and governance criteria. As we all know that ESG has evolved from other historical movements that focused on health and safety issues, pollution reduction, and corporate philanthropy. Whereas in present scenario, ESG has become one of the most important agenda for various business, which decides many investment and capital allocation decisions for any business. With this background, I would like to welcome our guest speaker today, Mr. Naveen GV, and our panel members, Mr. Rahul Preetiani, Ms. Shruti Iyer, and Mr. Rajesh Kumar Jha. I would like to introduce today Mr. Naveen GV, who is an EHS expert and a management professional with 23 plus years of experience spanning across government, consulting, and industry sectors. He is currently the Managing Director, APAC, and Corporate Officer for Benchmark Digital Partners LLC, US, and Benchmark ESG Private Limited, India, a US headquartered company offering software solutions to global customers in managing their environmental, social, and governance program. In his earlier role, Naveen was the EHS leader at General Electric GE Bangalore. Naveen has a master's degree in environmental engineering, and he's also a lead auditor for ISO 14001, Environmental Management System, and RC 14001, Responsible Care Management System, covering environmental health, safety, security, product stewardship, and outreach activities. I would also like to introduce Mr. Rahul Preetiani, who is a Senior Director, Consulting, Sustainability, Energy, and Commodities, CRISIL Limited. Mr. Rahul heads the consulting business for sustainability, energy, and commodities. He and his team specialize in assignments supporting corporates for sustainability, ESG strategy, business planning, strategy formulation, market opportunity assessment, risk management, and fundraising. He has spearheaded the launch of ESG and sustainability offerings in India for CRISIL. Rahul is an alumnus of the prestigious Columbia Business School, New York, where he did his executive program in management. He also holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and a postgraduate degree in business administration. Welcome, Mr. Rahul. We also have with us today Ms. Shruti Kaveri Iyer, who is an experienced entrepreneur, investment professional with a proven ability to transform ideas into successful ventures across multiple sectors and geographies. Shruti is a co-founder and managing partner of Kaha Capital, an impact investment advisory based in Bangalore. Shruti also manages Wharton Alumni Angels as the South Asia Managing Director. Shruti is an active angel investor and currently oversees the expansion strategy of 2 early-stage companies. Prior to this, Shruti ran a skincare startup for 3 years in Boston. Since moving to Bangalore, Shruti has been actively involved in the health, wellness, and fintech sectors. Previously, she was a commodities trader based in Indonesia and Hong Kong and ran that business for 6 years before moving to the US. While running her e-commerce business, Shruti was simultaneously the Harvard Kennedy School pursuing her MBA on a John F. Kennedy Fellowship. Prior to HK, Shruti graduated with an MBA with a major in finance from the Wharton Business School on a Ford Fellowship. Shruti majored in environmental engineering and has a bachelor's in engineering from VTU, Karnataka, where she graduated on the top of her class. Welcome, Shruti. We also have with us today my co-chair, Mr. Rajesh Kumar Jha, who is a sustainability ESG professional having vast working experience of 14 years in government R&D institutes, metal, automotive, and electrical and electronic sectors. Currently, he is working in ABB India Limited as the country environment and sustainability manager. He holds a MTech degree in energy and environmental engineering from Vellore Institute of Technology, VIT Vellore. MBA degree in business management from LIMS University, Mumbai, and advanced diploma in industrial safety, MSBTE, Maharashtra. He has experience in promoting environmental, social, and governance across manufacturing units as well as value chain. His contribution in environment has been published in several national and international journals. Now, I hand over the stage to Mr. Naveen to start the session.
Great. Thanks, Vishwas. Hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to also my co-panelist on the BCIC Expert Committee on ESG. Welcome to all the participants who've come in today as well. So the story is I'm here in Bangkok, and Vishwas and I had a call yesterday. And when I mentioned Bangkok, Vishwas did say, "Okay, are you there on business or travel?" And I had to tell him that no, it's not travel or leisure, but it's more about business. And what brings me here is the fact that we are working with an institution called the Seafood Task Force. And this is the seafood supply chain to the entire world, if you will. And these guys are having challenges with managing the social aspects of how seafood is dealt with. And they'd like to come out a lot more responsible on both the environmental and the social front with this entire supply chain of seafood. So I was talking to them about how they can look at the overall umbrella of ESG and how digital can be a huge player in this. And that's what brings me to Bangkok, and we're having this workshop for the 3-day time period this now. Having said that, and obviously the fact is ESG is here to stay. And as the expert committee, we met last month and we deliberated around how we go about it. I think Vishwas and Rupa will talk to us on the next steps, but we said, let's go ahead and start with the basics of answering the question around what is ESG and what is this new terminology that's into our space. So with that, I think I'll just kind of walk through the agenda. So what I'd cover in the next 30 minutes before I have our panelists join in for a Q&A is about an overview on ESG, some history and evolution of how and where we stand with that, and really why businesses should be doing ESG again, and some aspects around each of the pillars of E, S, and G, not to steal the thunder from the various webinars we will have in the coming months, and then some challenges around ESG disclosure and some takeaways from my perspective. Right, diving in. So when you break down ESG, it's about environmental, social, and governance aspect, right? And I think if you the chart on the left is very clear. Environmental, I think the risk factors that today people are talking around are climate change, biodiversity, carbon intensity, and so on and so forth. And the social aspects, the debate is around mostly environment, health and safety, which is health and safety. It's about diversity, inclusion, and equity, as well as human rights. And obviously the fact of equal opportunities across the board. The governance front is a little more established over the last, I would say, decade or two, because these were practices that we put into place much before. Evolves around business ethics, compliance, also the new topics around board independence, exec compensation, and stuff like that. So today, I think if you look at as business owners or people who are managing the function around ESG, the question that is asked is really, how is an organization managing risk and opportunities in today's time frame related to ESG? And this question is coming from a lot of people. The government playing a key role now, I think, which we will see in the next few slides. Investors again asking that question because they have a huge stake in what a business can do with the funding that they receive through them. Lastly, also consumers, suppliers, and employees who also have a very key role to play in the overall ESG umbrella, if you will. So if you look at the evolution of ESG, I think this is a slide I put together with some notes across. I think back in the 80s, we did kind of start with the campaign around health and safety, and in India with the Environment Protection Act coming into play, there was a lot of emphasis, and people started to feel that, okay, we got to kind of be in compliance to these, also because of the fact that it's important to have the business function and also have the environment be protected. The second aspect of the 90s really started with the boom around triple bottom line reporting. Triple bottom line was a term coined under the United Nations framework, which really kind of spelled that it's just not necessary for a business to deliver profit, but you also got to take care of the planet as well as its people. And that evolved into being a lot more on the definition of sustainability, which came into play. And then it moved in the 2000s to what is today known as the CSR, with some legal framework in place that India put together very recently. But it started to look at what are you doing as a business for the community around you, right? And how engaged are you with the community, which again evolved from the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN put together back in the 2015, which set a target of 2030 to evolve all the 17 goals that they framed, right? And over the last couple of years, we're seeing a lot of traction in what is called ESG, which is a convergence of all of these various things that you see on the screen, but also with the aspect of social responsible investing, which is another play that came in again in the early 2000s, which also has a key role with the ESG evolution in general. So having said that, when you look at that from an evolution standpoint, but now if you look at the global legislative landscape, there's a lot of legislations like how India mandated BRSR starting this year. Similar light we see across the world in North America with the SEC rule, with Europe, with South America, South Africa, as well as the larger Asia Pacific domain. So a lot of these regions have mandated ESG disclosures as of this year, right? And that's the direction that even the countries which are not represented here are taking today. Having said that, India obviously, like I mentioned, we mandated the SEBI's BRSR this year. But again, from an evolution standpoint, right from when we had the national voluntary guidelines to business responsibility reporting that covered a lot of the governance front of ESG, to CSR being covered under the Companies Act. So between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, there is a legal framework in place for what we call as ESG in India, which is represented under the BRSR program, if you will. And that's not just enough, but while we have the legal framework, I think we also have a directive from the Prime Minister's office when we committed to the net zero target of 2070, and that will involve us as businesses to be contributing to that net zero target, because predominantly we see a lot of the carbon emissions coming out from the industrial sector. And even if it's not mandated right now for everybody, but I think going with the direction that we're seeing, we will see traction in things being mandated for us to be reporting under and complying under. So my bottom line obviously is the fact that ESG is here and very relevant to businesses today, be it both from the compliance front and also from an investor front, where investors are looking at how businesses are performing on their ESG KPIs in able to decide access to better capital, right? So it's not an option anymore is what I would say. And as the chart would represent here, I think the projection, if you see, if we increased our global warming by about 3.2 degrees, I think the net impact on GDP that is estimated in the Asian region is about 37.4% negative, which is huge considering where we are today. With obviously, we're seeing a lot of natural calamities, and those are all the factors that are really impacting on where the spending is going, not just in the Asian region, but across the world as well, where a lot of the impact is going to be seen. So the other aspect I wanted to kind of touch on was, while there is pressure on businesses today to report around ESG, but obviously we also understand that ESG is here to create value, and how, right? Being from GE, I think back in the early 2000s, GE launched what is called the Eco-Imagination program that spoke about not just reducing a carbon footprint back then, but it also looked at introducing a new line of products which were more sustainable, be it aircraft engines or locomotives, and they would sell at a premium just because you would attach the factor of sustainability to that particular product. Right. Another example today is I was talking to a colleague of mine who's in Rajasthan, and he was telling me that in their supermarkets there, or the stores out there, when you go to kind of shop grocery, you have an option to either buy a regular paper bag, or you can buy a bag which is a little more expensive compared to the paper bag, but it is made by tribal women using natural materials. Right. And the obvious choice is, if I was offered that, I would go for the one that is made by the tribal women, because it will promote sustainable, I would say, product buy. So that is what the consumer mindset is today about. So you can attract a lot more consumers and create a lot more growth value proposition for yourself by doing ESG well, right? And the second aspect is cost reduction. When you talk about net zero, a lot of the businesses today are thinking about, how do I reduce my carbon footprint? And a lot of them are got to do with low-hanging fruits, right? It's not a lot of investment that is required up front, but with tapping the low-hanging fruits that you have with respect to conserving energy or water or reducing your waste, there's a lot of efficiency that you can build into your organizations that for itself can start kind of funding a lot more initiatives. The other aspect, I think I was reading, obviously, the report from CRISIL that Rahul, I think, might talk to as well, is when you're doing these calculations, you put a cost for how much of carbon you're going to save. Right, and today's cost of carbon is between $5 to $20. So if you use that as part of your calculations, a lot of your projects which are for resource conservation can be very, very viable and a lot more attractive to your C-suite. Not that they're not aware today of where it is right now in the value. The other aspect that ESG can create a lot more value is with respect to employee production and productivity and retention. So I was sharing this at my conference couple of months back, where we as IT major, when we hire people, we ask them the question, why do they want to work with us? And a common aspect is they tell us that we'd like to work for you because you guys are working in the space of ESG and are helping businesses be able to contributing into becoming more responsible from that aspect. And they'd love to come and work with us on this particular mission. So that goes for all businesses as well. So when employees, the millennials, recognize the fact that as a business, we are sustainable, we are kind of doing things in the right frame of mind, I think you'll have a lot more retention and a lot more good talent that you can really kind of bring on board. The last aspect I kind of touched on earlier was about how you have better access to funds and investments from the marketplace. As individuals, all of us are aware of CIBIL score, and a better CIBIL score for us means we have access to loans at a reduced interest rate. And that same thing applies to businesses as well. You have a good ESG score, you have better access to capital and at a much better rate. And in addition to getting access to government subsidies and support, which will be kind of coming into play, right? So ESG, don't do it just for the fact that it's a mandate and it's a compliance, but I think do it for all these various reasons that we spoke of. And I'm sure the panelists later on will add a lot more value to it as well. Touching on the three key factors, which is E, S, and G, I'm not going to go deep dive, but quickly point to the fact that environment really means emissions, waste, biodiversity, water effluents, compliance, as well as energy reduction. Right, so these are the various ambits of aspects or issues, if you call, the ones that are going to be talked about. And then the question to you as functional leaders are going to be, what are we doing on this front to reduce our footprint? On the environmental front, I think climate change is huge, and I just want to bring this into play. Is about when we talk of measuring our carbon footprint, we are looking at three dimensions. Scope 1, purely emissions that are related from our own operations, to Scope 2, which is inclusive of purchased electricity, steam, heating, or cooling that we kind of bring on board. And Scope 1 and 2 are things that are pretty much common in today's marketplace. I think businesses are kind of tracking those and then reporting around those in their sustainability report so far. Scope 3 is where it can get a lot more trickier and a lot more thought behind how you estimate that, because Scope 3 is just not about your operations, but it's about emissions that come from your value chain, which means that you got to account for your suppliers and then be able to track those and then bring that into play. There are some guidelines and then some categories that are pretty much defined in the protocols on how you estimate that. But that's the big question that today we're getting from the marketplace. And every other request we have from businesses today when they talk to us is about how do we do better Scope 3, how to kind of capture those information and data points related to that. The S is more around, like I said, health and safety, diversity, human rights, employment, training and education as well. And I think these are becoming very, very important factors. And like I said, the business I'm here with the last couple of days in Bangkok is about social compliance, if you will. It's about still, I think there was an issue with child labor, slavery in the supply chain for seafood, which the businesses are now looking at doing better at. Right. And the G part, I think, which I spoke to you earlier, is a lot more consolidated because even in India, we had the BRR that spoke to a lot of the G aspects. But really, the governance pillar drives the other two ones, which is E and G, right? So having a clear process, policies, as well as structure, which really spell out what an organization commitment are going to be key from a governance standpoint. And if you look at the chart below, a question on a survey that was done by EY talked to the fact that 50% close to the board meetings have a topic around ESG. And I'm a bit surprised because I thought it'd probably be a little more, but then frequently discussed still kind of outmatch that. The key aspects around governance revolves around a couple of aspects. Exec pay is probably high, ethical business practices, technology, and ensuring data privacy of the people that are involved in your value chain, as well as stakeholder engagement and rights. So several aspects that talk around the importance of why governance is key and a foundation to establish the other two pillars. So having said that, let me also touch on what are some challenges that we see in the marketplace with respect to ESG disclosures, right? So we know for a fact that ESG has been around for some time. And if you look at this chart that we put together, while it is mandated in several countries right now, including our SEBI's BRSR, as well as EU taxonomy and other things, but there's several voluntary standards which are available. Some might be familiar to us, GRI and CDP probably being the most familiar ones, but I think there are others that are very relevant based on which business sector you represent. So our advice would be looking at identify the frameworks that deliver the best value for your business, right? So if you're in real estate, the GRESP is probably the most ideal one. If you're starting on your ESG journey, looking at science-based targets, if your material topic is primarily climate change, is probably a good initiative. So I think you probably will need to do a deep dive in understanding which of these alphabet soup of frameworks apply best to your business and are most valued from the start, right? Coming into just the BRSR's framework, I think, like you mentioned, these were built around the 9 principles of the NGRBC, and obviously have a scope in terms of having those 9 principles divided into aspects like the essential things that you need to comply with and some leadership criteria that you have some time to comply with in demonstrating growth towards completing this particular framework, right? And what we've heard from businesses right now who are challenged from an operational standpoint in putting this together are the facts around how do I standardize my data collection across the entire enterprise, right? So if I'm like an Adani, I have about 300 sites across the country. How do I look at unifying this approach so that I have an apples to apples data collection from each of my facilities, right? Coupled with the fact that how accurate, how can I verify my data and ensure that this is the right data that's going in, which is being reported, right? And while ESG is just not related to environmental health and safety and sustainability team, but I think the stakeholders are going to be beyond that and would include, to a great extent, people from the finance department, people from legal, people from the management team, who are going to be key stakeholders that provide you with the necessary information to compile your BRSR framework. And not just BRSR, but any ESG framework for that matter that we spoke of in the alphabet soup. And obviously, I think the challenge with all the collection involves, if you're doing it manually, a high degree of effort, which is probably also prone to errors, right? And if you had to report that same data across multiple frameworks, I think it will be a huge challenge to businesses today. So while BRSR is mandated for the top 1,000 listed entities in the country right now, but I think SEBI has also launched something called as the BRSR Lite, right? Which is voluntary for the non-1,000 listed companies. But obviously, I think being a professional in this domain for several years, I see that come into play actively over the next 5 to 10 years. And BRSR will not be limited to this top 1,000 companies. I think all of us in the business fraternity will have a key role to play in ensuring that India gets net zero. So BRSR Lite in some form will be mandated in coming times. When it comes to data, and not just SEBI, but any of the alphabet soup, GRI, CDP, or investors, when they look at your data, they look at data as investment grade as their need. And what does investment grade means is the fact that the data has to come from a process which is after following that, the data is an outcome of having done that, not just going into an Excel sheet and populating a set of data points right away. So people look at data which is auditable, traceable, verifiable, and which is collected, like I said, from a process rather than just a metric that's going and fed into the system. And what I think as benchmark ESG, we did a survey of our customers, and the number one barrier they kind of presented to us in putting together investment grade data was a lack of digital technology. And this is where I think we come into play in helping businesses transform their operational processes in doing digital, right? This is my last slide, and I think I might have a minute or two before I transition over to the panelist. Just a summary of the key takeaways that we spoke of right now. ESG in today's marketplace is becoming indispensable with compliance, as well as investors kind of calling out very clearly what they need is keeping businesses on their toes. And since the C-suite is involved, considering the fact that it has exposure to government as well as investors, there is going to be a lot of traction happening right now, right? And obviously, ESG is becoming as emerging of the top material issues, and climate change is on everyone's mind right now, considering where we are, and we're seeing a lot of turmoil. Lastly, I think the third point is about we also know for a fact that it's creating incredible value. right? For people who are doing it right, I think they have demonstrated a substantial, I would say, increase in profits compared to previous terms, and the several case studies that talk to it as well. But nevertheless, it comes with its own challenges because, like I mentioned, there are several frameworks out in the marketplace which all talk around ESG, and it's critical for you as a business to understand which of the frameworks provide you the best value and then align yourself to that and start to report around that. Right. BRSR, for that matter, is also aligned with the GRI standards, which makes it easier for businesses who are already reporting under GRI to use the same framework for BRSR. So there's a bit of mapping. There's a mapping document that talks around GRI and BRSR. I would say matched functionality as well as need. Last but not the least, I think, like I said, we have seen digital as being the enabler in the whole process and being able to drive effective means of capturing investment grade data and producing that for businesses. So with that, I think that was my last slide. I think we have questions that we will take as a panel, but back to you, Vishwas. Vishwas, you're muted in case you're speaking. Yeah.
Thank you, Naveen, for this informative session and taking us through the ESG terminologies and its necessity in current competitive business for betterment of environment and society. Now let us move on to our next agenda of the session, the Q&A. I request all the participants, if they have any questions, please put it onto the chat box so that I can direct it to the panelists, please. Now, the first question is to Mr. Naveen. There are various steps involved in developing and implementing ESG strategy for any company. As per your experience, which step is one of the most challenging one for any industry during implementation phase?
Great. I think great question, Vishwas. Thanks for the question. So I think a year back we had a speaker from Deloitte come and speak at our conference. And I think his point was, when answering a question around when is it right to go out and disclose and publish your ESG data. And his point was very simple. I think he answered it with a nice statement. He said, imagine yourself going into a boardroom and will you go out to a boardroom just when you're out of bed? Right. So that was his way of answering the question, which meant that you got to be well prepared before you go out and publish your ESG frameworks and your ESG data. So it goes back to the point of following a process where you're looking at starting the data collection across your enterprise. You know what to collect. Number one, you start to collect data. You assess where you stand with the data. You run a few pilots to understand the quality as well as the value that the data is providing. Align yourself with the framework that you'd like to report the data under, and then go out and put out your data, either obviously in a voluntary standard or a mandated standard as required.
Thank you. Another question which is there in the chat box, is there any standard for ESG like ISO, Naveen? CSR for employees is considered in ESG?
Yeah, there are standards around it, Vishwas. I think I kind of refer to it. There's an ISO. Let me tell you the specific reference. There's ISO 26000 that talks to it.
Okay, thank you. The next question is to Mr. Rahul Pritiani. Does driving the ESG agenda mean sacrificing company returns?
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be interacting with everyone. Vishwas, I think this is a question that all consultants keep getting asked.
I'm not able to hear you, Rahul. Can you just?
This is an important question.
Volume, please.
Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me?
The audio is low.
Yes, please.
The audio
please.
is low. Yes.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah. So I think this is one important question which all consultants get asked. What is the incremental value, especially from corporates which are at relatively early stage in their entire journey in terms of the impact and the cost and the return profile that they are likely to see. Because typical first reaction of most managements is that this is a cost. How do I kind of, handle it? It'll hurt my return profile over a period of time, and it is going to dip. And I am a listed entity. I am accountable for quarterly results to my shareholders. So do I make this investment? Uh, but I think increasingly, I think as the corporates are maturing, they are really realizing that over a period of time, if you look at it across the board in terms of a full cycle kind of a life cycle of a business, I think this is the returns are really not really impacted. In fact, they are supported and enhanced. I think various studies have showed that. Uh, so if one looks at from a cost angle, one also has to look at business sustainability, which becomes a very, very critical element. So if one looks at the regulatory angle, we are already aware, there are various regulations that are there domestically and globally. BRSR is something Naveen, already alluded to. And also we are having RBI come up with a climate risk policy, and with that coming through, I think increasingly the corporates will have to factor in the costs which come on account of the same. And in the medium to long term, if a strategic plan for investments is not made, what we will find is, there will be challenges that will be there to the business in terms of survivability and sustainability itself, because compliance is the number one element that one needs as a business needs to kind of take care of. So if you're not complying, not disclosing what you're supposed to, then it really it's a non-discretionary item where one has to incur cost. Additionally, I think for various businesses, we have clearly seen, it's also an opportunity kind of to kind of relook at the overall operations of the entity, where you look at multiple areas. I think the term that we hear a lot and we kind of discuss with our clients a lot is the war on waste. I think clearly waste is one area where a lot of corporates very often there is an inertia. You don't really look at your operations very closely, and there are many items which are uh, so there are many items which are really avoidable, are one has to one kind of put some of those items on abeyance. One relooks at the entire process, and you try to bring in efficiency wherever possible in that entire element. So that really helps. For many organizations, we've also seen looking at the overall power costs has helped them kind of look at how they can optimize and reduce costs. They've looked at alternatives such as renewables, which has again come and help them. So clearly, if one looks at it from a very, very short-term perspective, probably, the returns may be hit. But if you look at a more medium to long term, I think clearly, the overall life cycle cost will only give you upside. And all one needs to do is be well organized, planned, well advised, wherein you take the various agenda items which may be there in ESG, because it's a fairly wide area, and you need to prioritize in terms of cost as well as impact and return profile, and must have a plan to kind of address that in an organized manner. And once one does that, there will be upside. And lastly, from an investor perspective, I think as my other colleague Shruti will probably speak about, increasingly this is also an important differentiator going forward, and it could also mean differential multiples to the way your investors look at you. So if one puts that also into context, I think there is absolutely no reason why this should be a dampener on returns for corporates.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
if
Ram.
I can just add to that, I think one perspective of incorporating ESG into an investment code is to raise the cost of capital for organizations that do not want to adopt ESG or will not take ESG seriously in the long term. But yeah, thanks, Rahul. That was very comprehensive and informative. Yeah.
There's another question to Mr. Rahul. How best and how seriously SEBI is looking and evaluating the disclosed data of any of the listed companies?
Um, So I think it's going to be more of a disclosure number where I think clearly there are well-defined set guidelines. You have to kind of report to the MCA 21 portal. And over a period of time, I think there will be assurance, audit, and other kind of cross checks that might come into the process. But to begin with, I think it's more of a disclosure related requirement, and SEBI seems to be pretty serious. And if one looks at the regulatory compliance and the guidelines by the Ministry of Finance and India's overall role in the overall global peace, where a lot of fund raise and capital inflows are needed by the country for various growth ambitions that the country has. In that context, with the kind of commitments that the government has been making, I think there has to be a very well organized code, and the various regulators in the country, be it SEBI, RBI, I think they are working towards this. So I think BRR was the first step. Now we are moving into BRSR Lite, and as more and more data becomes available, I think there will be more and more means to kind of validate and cross check this data. And as organizations also evolve, because as you would understand, getting all the data in place comprehensively across the board may be challenging. But over a period of time, as systems and processes are in place and technology is being leveraged, I think you can get a much wider and better quality data. And at that stage, probably you'll have a much more detailed scrutiny of the data also.
Thank you, Rahul. The next question is to Mr. Rajesh Jha. What are some of the roadblocks to ESG adoption in Indian businesses?
Yeah, so good evening, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Vishwas, for asking a quite pertinent questions, because this particular question goes in everyone's mind that how will I implement my ESG framework, more systematically, and of course, there should not be any issue as such, because being in industry, in fact, we are also seeing multiple roadblocks. We know that these are the challenges that we need to address, and I must just put some 2 to 3 in fact the challenges what we will be having or anybody faces in fact in current world, mainly on in fact in terms of the shortage of the skilled talent pool what we have. In fact, when you see still like we don't have so many in fact skilled ESG professional in industry, and we generally have to go to the some third parties like who are maybe it can be any expert third party who will be supporting us to provide some of the ESG in fact some strategies or some of the best practices they can share so that we can implement. So many industries they're really having a shortage of skilled talented pool, and that is one of the hurdle you can say that that is really stopping the ESG framework to be implemented in a much systematic manner in any industry in fact. And I think this area in fact we can address it in much better way, because the way we have started this sort of awareness session, in fact we can have a multiple awareness training programs for our own employees, our own internal manpower, so that our ESG skills can be enhanced, and of course this area can be taken care. And the second, one of the most important point is on the cost part, because I think we all are aware this is one of the biggest, roadblocks for any industry, because they want to do multiple things, but the cost comes into the picture, and they slightly compromise with some of the activities. In fact, in any company or industry, in fact, so I think we are aware, like to implement any ESG initiative, it can be energy efficiency improvement activities, can be rainwater harvesting implementation initiatives. We need some, some money, right? At the end of the day, we need to incur some cost, and many companies, in fact, they think as a short term, and because of that, they are not able to implement some of the ESG projects. But as I think Rahul as well as Naveen also mentioned, I think we should look this investment, for the future perspective also. That is going to give us the benefit in the macro level in near future, not in a very short term thought process. In fact, so I think this is the second one, and in fact, the multiple other things. Of course, Naveen also shared in his slides that good quality of data. In fact, how the industry is capturing those data, how they are reporting it, it's one of the challenge, and really kind of that can be of course be addressed. We have a multiple new technologies coming up which really talks about the kind of data capturing in our AI based solutions and all. I think this area also, though it's a challenge, but can be addressed in a much better way by any industry. And last not the least, of course, there are multiple. However, identifying the material issue, we also observe that this is the another area where industries need to focus, because we cannot put one size fits for all, right, for any ESG implementation. So here, in fact, every industry needs to identify their own materiality. They have to understand that what all the challenges they are having in their particular sector, in fact, or maybe their particular industry, and they have to take up those areas as a kind of material issues for their ESG framework implementation and overall implementation of any initiative in their plant actually. So I think these are some of the areas, I think, which are the having some of the kind of impact on our implementation. And of course this can be addressed in a much better way, in a much more systematic manner in in any industry, in fact. Yeah, so that much, Mr. Vishwas. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajesh. There's another question to Mr. Rahul on, are there any discussions going on in SEBI with respect to mandating further limitations with respect to ESG performances of listed companies, especially on greenhouse gas emissions?
I'm not sure about limitations, but I think clearly, they want it to be the disclosures to be more and more robust, and the quality and the coverage to be more comprehensive. I think over a period of time, like in any regulatory regime, I think you would expect evolution to be expected by the regulator, and we would see more and more coming through. And in order to kind of manage some of this year itself, although for FY22 it was not mandatory, already have about 2 odd companies started to discuss RSR. So people want to also test the waters, and they want to check their systems and processes. And over a period of time, my sense is this will clearly happen. Immediately, is it on the cards? Probably. I mean, not really sure, but I'm sure it is going to tighten going.
Thank you, Rahul. There's another question to Mr. Naveen. There's a guest who's asking who are the service provider certificates who are certifying this ISO 26000?
I think a lot of the certification agencies like DNV or PVQI, I think, will be able to kind of certify to ISO 26001. I think the ones that deal with all the kind of relevant ISO standards, including the integrated standards, I think we should be able to do the certification.
Thank you, Naveen. The next question goes to Mrs. Shruti. India has a high potential for growth in sustainable investing with an opportunity to mobilize $1 trillion towards top ESG priorities by 2030. As per your experience, what are the barriers which need to be removed to realize the same? Shruti, you're not audible.
Thanks, Vishwas. Did you say guidelines? What are some of the guidelines to make that possible?
Yes. What are the barriers and what needs to be removed to realize the same?
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Great to be here. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about it from an asset management perspective, and particularly like the PE/VC industry. So we have seen a lot of interest in ESG funds from institutional investors, and the reason institutional investors are interested in ESG funds is because they themselves are facing a push from their stakeholders, who are asking, where their capital is being allocated. And the first sort of manifestation of that, from our experience, is that there is an exclusion list, which means that a lot of ESG funds, because of what their institutional investors are demanding, are saying, we will not invest into certain high risk and probably even medium risk sectors. And some examples of those are industries that emit a lot of the type 1 emissions that Naveen was talking about, industries that engage in selling of prohibited materials such as alcohol, tobacco, etc. Now, what do we need to do to help propel more capital into ESG? I think what is required is really awareness building, and post that awareness building, engagement, and then continued sort of engagement with institutional investors. And the way to do that is to make sharing of data very, very transparent, and also sort of becoming a part of the process that helps exhibit, like we were talking about, the cost of capital, and overall how risk goes down, and therefore your investment returns are better because of complying with ESG standards. If we look at the COVID period, ESG funds actually perform better than your other standard funds, and that is great for promoting ESG as a parameter for more fund managers to come and say that, hey, I want to be an asset manager and look at more ESG organizations, and therefore have a fund that invests into such organizations. In terms of barriers, one is obviously the internal push, but the external push has to come from the policy side. And because we are talking about things on a global scale, I personally think it would be good to have a standard code such as the Paris Climate Collaborative, where countries can agree on what are the minimum standards for ESG compliance from an asset management perspective. I'm sorry, I'm talking about it a lot from management of capital, but here I think the question was particularly about how to make sure that there is that $1 trillion capital allocation to ESG funds. I personally think it can be we can beat that goal and actually go beyond that. So thank you.
Thank you, Shruti. Now I request Mr. Rahul to just sum up the entire session, and what do you think about ESG and where do we head from here?
So I think thanks, Vishwas. Thanks for and thanks again for all the participants. So I think basis our discussion today and what we kind of took away, I think there is a lot happening in the external environment on account of sustainability that one is both on the regulatory side, both on the ask from the end user stakeholders, as Naveen mentioned. I think it's becoming more and more critical from the customer side, be it from the entire value chain side. Social aspects are coming to the fore, especially after COVID, the way things evolve. So it becomes very, very critical for us to have the right thought process as well as right degree of buy-in within the organizations, so that one can address issues with respect to uh, uh, elements right from a top-down manner, which are critical from a sustainability perspective. And sure, this will also throw up a lot of good opportunities from a business perspective, because there are a lot of areas where sustainability pivot is very critical for your existing offerings. It will also throw up many new opportunities in your business, and you need to be planned. You need to plan for that. And at the same time, in the environment, there will also be regulatory requirements that will be there, and internally organizations would have to gear up in terms of their overall reporting journey as well as data capture, and give it the due importance that it requires. And please build it in your overall pricing as well as your cost, because that's how your customers are looking at it. And as was mentioned by Naveen, very often customers are willing to pay a higher price, as long as they know they are doing the right thing for the environment. And very often, you would see your competitors coming in the market and offering something very, very similar. So I think one has to take a larger holistic view, and as one looks at it from a through the cycle perspective, I think it is very, very critical element in the overall sustainability piece. And from a fundraising point of view also, as we discussed, I think it's becoming very critical for most of the institutional investors, as was mentioned, in the PEPC world. Additionally, on the banking side and on the lending side too, I think incrementally we are seeing clear moves from the regulators to kind of, link, do a risk-based pricing. And when one is doing risk-based pricing for sustainability and ESG, it will also become a very, very critical element in your overall, cost of funds. So given that criticality, I think it's very important for one to plan well, put systems and processes in place, whatever is necessary. And also the point that Rajesh mentioned, capacity building within the organization, very, very key element. I think that is also one key element of focus that one would need to put together to have a good runway going forward and to be ready for the next 10 years within the business. That I would like to thank everyone who's joined us, and get all the questions that were given, and hope it was a good takeaway for everyone.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Naveen, Rahul, Shruti, and Mr. Rajesh for a very informative session on ESG. Now I hand over the stage to Rupa for the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, all the speakers. This was really quite an exhaustive discussion. Thanks for participating in this session. We look forward to have many more sessions in the future as well. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.